Hi, and welcome to a very special episode of Board Game Feast. I was at a local convention a couple of years ago when I was suddenly overwhelmed with very powerful hunger browsing the local prototypes and happened to spot this game right here, Steam Up, a feast of dim sum by a couple of local designers. I've been very closely following its development ever since and very excited to finally have it on my table. So let's take a look. I'll show you how it works. In the remote mountains of the Far East lies the fabled dim sum restaurant Steam Up, a sanctuary for weary travellers. You play as a group of animal companions, sampling the tasty treats that the restaurant has to offer. But there's only a limited quantity of dumplings, so you'll have to be quite strategic to get your fill in this game of wonton excess. So the first thing you'll notice is this incredible centerpiece here, the turntable filled with steamers and dim sum. Now these are prototype components, so make sure to check the Kickstarter project for more details on the final production. So the turntable here is split into multiple feast zones depending on the number of players. Now you can only claim the dim sum that's in your feast zone, so the player on the bottom left here would be able to claim these two steamers. If a steamer sits on the divide between two feast zones, then either player can claim it. So if you spot a particularly juicy looking steamer, you can access that by rotating it into your feast zone. So to claim a particular steamer, you'll be collecting and paying these tokens here. These represent each of the 5 types of dim sum. So to claim this steamer here, you would need to pay one of the tokens for each of the dim sum in this steamer. So on your turn, you'll have 2 actions, and they each have to be different. The first and simplest of these is that you can claim one of the dim sum tokens that you use to spend on the steamers. The second is spending those tokens to purchase one of the steamers in your feast zone. You can draw one of these fortune cards that give you a variety of effects and then optionally rotate the turntable 90 degrees. You can play one of the fortune cards from your hand and again optionally rotate the turntable. Finally, you can discard 2 fortune cards from your hand to take an additional token. So when you buy a steamer, you'll then add the dim sum in that steamer to your player board, which will give you a certain number of points depending on what type it is, and these all differ based on the 12 different player boards available. These 12 boards each represent one of the animals from the Chinese zodiac. They all have slightly different scoring, they start with different resources, and they all have a special ability that slightly changes how you play the game. So there's plenty of ways to approach this. There are also fate cards that provide some kind of event to change the game each round, and game will end when either a certain number of these cards have been drawn or a certain number of steamers have been bought. So this is one of the best examples I've seen of a game capturing a real life experience. Not just that tactile, toyetic feeling of rotating the turntable, but the companionship of sitting around a table, sharing a meal or a game with friends. Those small moments of tension, whether you ordered the right balance of food that everyone will enjoy, whether there's enough for everyone to get their fill, who'll take that last dumpling. It can be quite chaotic, for better or worse. Those fortune cards especially can turn the game with a little bit of luck going either way. Though I did appreciate they've divided those fortune cards into various archetypes that you can remove certain ones you don't like. For example, there are several that are very much take that, stealing a resource from another player, and you can just take out all of the cards with that symbol if that's something that your group really doesn't gel with. But one way or another, you're really going to be relying on those fortune cards to get an edge in this game. And in that sense, it's not particularly strategic, especially in a 4 or 5 player game where the turntable is just going back and forth constantly between your turns, and you're seeing that dim sum disappear before your eyes. But the uptick here is that it's a super accessible game. It's so tactile and easy to visualize what options are available to you at any given time. Not to mention the theme is just so joyful. It really reminds me of a bit of Splendor, the way you're spending those tokens, but instead of claiming stuffy European nobles, you're claiming stuffed dumplings. I think just about anyone can get on board with that. That said, perhaps the biggest downside to this game is that it's going to make you incredibly hungry to play. So why don't we go to the kitchen and we'll make our very own feast of dim sum. So going to start with some char siu. It is Chinese barbecue meat bun. We're starting here with a nice fatty cut of pork belly. We'll be marinating that with a sauce that has some 5 spice powder, soy sauce, hoisin sauce, garlic. The distinct red colouring traditionally comes from fermented bean curd, which I wasn't able to find, unfortunately. A lot of restaurants just use red food colouring, so that's what we'll be using here today. We're then going to be slow roasting the pork, continuing to baste it with the marinade at regular intervals. And once that's cooked and diced, we're going to be turning that into the meat filling with some shallots, soy sauce, chicken stock, and thickening it up to a nice gravy consistency with some flour. Now the dough here we want to be nice and fluffy for this style of dumpling, so we're going to let some yeast dough rise for a while before adding in some baking powder and getting another mix. Once it's risen again, we're going to be cutting it up into logs before rolling it into balls and flattening it out into discs, making sure the edges are nice and thin to be able to wrap them up into a nice point. Next, we're going to make some prawn dumplings. So we're going to start with some raw prawns here, obviously.
Don't you come the raw prawn with me?
Setting aside half of them whole, and the rest we're going to dice up into a fine paste. To that, we're going to add some water chestnuts, some ginger, chives, sesame oil, and seasoning. Now, I did try making my own traditional wraps for these. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the right type of wheat starch, so it never quite came together in the right consistency. So we just ended up using some wonton wrappers for this. Not quite the right thinness and translucency that you have for the traditional hagao shrimp dumplings, but still quite tasty. So you want one of the whole prawns along with some of the rest of the mixture in these, and the trick to wrapping them is to pinch and fold along the edges to get that traditional look. You can see here I was only partly successful with that. It just takes a lot of practice, basically. Now, for disclosure, I'm obviously not an expert on Chinese cuisine and culture, though I did try to research some more traditional recipes and techniques for the dumplings that I made here. That said, one of the things I really appreciate most about the rulebook for this game is the amount of flavour that they put into it, with a lot of cultural notes and background context to a lot of the details that you'll find in the game. It's so clear that a lot of passion and knowledge went into this project at every level. Steam Up, A Feast of Dim Sum is coming to Kickstarter very soon on October 19th, so be sure to check that out for more information. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching Board Game Feast, where the games table and dining table meet to create lasting memories.